There is a trend currently blowing up in the fashion world. The fashion world obviously being Fashionalia, planet orbiting Alpha Centauri A. And that trend is shirring. Brands such as Reformation are, I believe, the ones that kicked off this trend. I mean, of course, after the Squig Bobs from Fashionalia made it fashionable about 2000 light years ago. But here on Earth, some quick Google searching has shown me that this fashion trend is now all over. It's all over huge fashion houses like ASOS and Urban Outfitters, Boohoo, along with other cheap exploitative fast fashion brands that I don't like to mention here on this channel. Luckily, it is a really easy top to either make from scratch or upcycle for ourselves, so let's get started. So this is the thrifted top that I'm going to be flipping into this new style. Oh whoops, I wore shorts that have the exact same blue gingham pattern on them as the top. How did I not realize that before? That's super confusing, I apologize. Anyway, this top that I thrifted for 300 yen is last season's old oversized off-shoulder top. At least, I think it was originally an off-shoulder top, but I guess it could also be worn like this. I'm not entirely sure, but it actually had some shirring of its own on it, just not in the spot we want. Anyway, what's important about this is that it's oversized for my body, meaning that we have a good amount of fabric to work with here. If I were to guess, I would say the bust measurement of this shirt would probably be about 1.5 times my bust measurement. We need extra fabric for shirring, so having about this amount extra is good. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the arms, except instead of just quickly cutting them off, I'm going to take my time and use a seam ripper, aka unpicker, to unpick the stitches holding the sleeve together to the bodice. That way I'll get a much nicer, cleaner, oops. Yeah, okay, turns out I don't have the patience for unpicking. Scissors it is! So I cut off the two sleeves along the seam line and I put them aside for the moment. We'll need them later, but not right now. Now what I'm gonna do is turn what's remaining of the top into essentially one long rectangle of fabric. To do that, I'm cutting off the top part here that curves inwards on the front and the back, and then flipping the fabric to its side, I'm gonna cut straight down the side seam here to open up the loop of fabric. And then finally, I'm gonna cut off this curved edge down the bottom. Now I have a long piece of fabric that's approximately 1.5 times my bust measurement. Wait, hang on. I really have to change out of these matching blue gingham shorts, or this is gonna get super confusing. Now I have a long piece of fabric that's approximately 1.5 times my bust measurement when I wrap it around myself like this. Now, we essentially have a fabric rectangle, but it's not an exact rectangle because it actually curves a little. Due to how the original top was sewn, it has a little bit more fabric up top for the bust. But I'm gonna work with this and just make sure that I keep the part with the extra fabric up the top because my bust measurement is bigger than my waist. Anyway, you can just make this top with a regular rectangle of fabric that's approximately 1.5 times your bust measurement and whatever length you want, plus 2 inches for hemming allowance. But I'm gonna try and work with this wonky rectangle. Next, over at my sewing machine, I'm going to sew a double hem on both the long edges at the top and the bottom of the rectangle. To do a double hem along a straight raw edge of fabric, fold it over once, iron, then fold it again, iron, and then sew across like this. Both times I folded the hem over, I folded it about 1/2 inch. So after doing that, here's my super long, wonky rectangle. Next, we are going to shirr this rectangle to make the shirred bodice piece. Now, I just uploaded a companion video to this one called How to Shirr. So if you don't know how to shirr fabric, give that a watch first. Click the I or find the link in the description box. Watched it? Great. Now that we all know how to shirr fabric, what I'm gonna do is shirr this rectangle piece like this in rows spaced about 1/2 inch apart, which I actually measured on my fabric to be about 5 squares of gingham, using the gingham as the fabric's own inbuilt ruler. I don't have to draw lines on my fabric. So with elastic wound in my bobbin, I started shirring away. This took about an hour or so, and once I got halfway, the now elasticated fabric became quite strong and had a lot of tension when trying to pull it flat. So I actually had to use both of my hands to pull the fabric flat while I went. This was a little bit difficult. Word from the wise, make sure to give your hands and wrists occasional breaks while doing this, or you could seriously get a repetitive strain injury. Don't say I didn't warn you. Side note, while shirring, I didn't shirr right up to the edges of my fabric. Once I was about 1/2 inch away from the edge of the fabric, I turned around to start the new line. This just makes it easier to sew the seams when we eventually sew it into a tube, because it'll mean the fabric will be a bit flatter at the ends. And an hour later, I am finally done shirring. So now I've got this newly stretchy fabric, which is what shirring does. Pretty cool, right? Next, I gave the fabric an iron. Now, a lot of sites I looked at regarding shirring said don't put your iron directly onto the fabric, just hold it above the fabric and steam it. But it was totally fine when I ironed the shirred fabric, normally touching it, also using a lot of steam. Then I folded this piece of fabric right sides together in half like this and clipped the raw ends into place. Next, I'm gonna sew down here with a straight stitch to turn this into a shirred tube. Then I changed presser feet on my sewing machine from a regular foot to an overlocking foot and went over the raw edges of the seam using that, which I did so the fabric at the seams wouldn't fray. However, you can finish the seam using whatever seam finishing method you want. This is what my seam looked like after using my overlocking foot on it, and that's the bodice done. Now, back to the sleeves. So here's the plan. I'm going to elasticize the top of the sleeves and then attach them to the bodice. Because of the shape of the tops of the sleeves when worn on the body, by doing this, I should get a square neckline. Fingers crossed. First, I'm going to make both sleeves the same length, shortening them slightly. This is because the original top had a bit of shirring around its neckline, which extended onto the sleeves, so I'm gonna get rid of that. With the sleeve folded like this, and with the tip of the shoulder up here, and the sleeve seam down here, I angled a ruler on top of the sleeve, kinda trying to get it the same angle as the original top edge of the sleeve. Then I cut this part off with my rotary cutter, which had become rather blunt, which is why I'm going back and forth on the fabric here, like it's a really thick pizza. This isn't how you're meant to use these things. I just forgot to bring any more fresh blades with me to Tokyo. By the way, I'll be repeating all these steps on the other sleeve identically so that I end up with 2 matching sleeves. So just remember, you gotta repeat all this on the other sleeve. Anyway, because of the angle of my cut, the very top of the sleeve ended up a little bit too pointy, so I'm also just gonna round that out with my rotary cutter as well. Next, I'm going to overlock the raw edges of each sleeve all the way around their openings. Because I didn't have an overlocker with me in Tokyo, this overlocking foot was really useful. If you don't have an overlocker, aka serger, or an overlocking foot, then you can use a short zigzag stitch over the raw edges that will also prevent fraying, or you can go around the edges with pinking shears. Then I turn this sleeve the right way around. The next thing I'm gonna do is create a casing for elastic that'll go around the very top of the sleeve. So this is my elastic. It's about 1/2 inch wide. I need to make sure the casing will be a little bit wider than the elastic so that the elastic will slide through the casing nicely. Important to note, the casing needs a small gap of about 2 inches to allow the elastic to be inserted into it. So don't sew all the way around. To make the casing, I folded the edge of the fabric inside the sleeve a little bit more than the width of the elastic, kind of like I'm doing a hem, and then I carefully sewed it into place with my needle going through the fabric just on its edge, because we want to leave plenty of room for the elastic. Now, because the edge of this fabric is curved, this is a little bit tricky. You do actually have to fold the fabric, kind of pleating it with your hand just before it goes under the presser foot in a lot of places to keep the casing even all the way around. Mine ended up looking something like this when I was done. See the pleats here around the top edge of the sleeve? The elastic will easily be able to get through as long as the casing is wide enough all around, so the pleats are not a concern. And you won't even be able to see the pleats once the elastic is inside it, as it'll bunch it all up anyway. Next, I put a safety pin through the end of my elastic. I haven't cut any of the elastic to the right length yet, that'll come later. For now, the rest of the elastic is still attached. Holding onto the safety pin, I used it to thread the elastic through the casing, going through the small gap first. I pulled through a kind of random amount, then I tried it on inside out on my shoulder like this. To get the elastic the right length, I pulled the elastic ends until it felt comfortable around my arm. Make sure not to pull it or secure it too tightly, as you might cut off your circulation if you do that. Make sure the elastic is tight enough so the sleeve will stay on your shoulder, but also that it has enough ease to be able to lift it off like this. Once the elastic was at the right length, I put the safety pin through both elastic ends to hold this length in place, and then I cut the excess elastic off. Then I sewed the 2 ends of the elastic together, making sure they weren't twisted inside the sleeve casing first. I attached the elastic ends by going over them with a zigzag stitch, forwards and backwards a couple of times. I pulled the elastic back into the sleeve and then sewed the casing closed using a straight stitch over the gap. Turning it right sides out, the sleeve is now ready to be attached to the bodice. I repeated this for the other sleeve. Now let's go and find the bodice. So here I've already attached the first sleeve to the bodice, as you can see, because I wanted to make sure that I do it right. Looks pretty good. Now I'll show you how to attach a sleeve by attaching the other one. Okay, the sleeve from the original top has a seam running down it. That seam, like most other sleeve seams you'll encounter, is placed along the center bottom of the sleeve. I matched up this sleeve seam with the seam on the bodice, which is where I sewed the bodice up into a tube. The other sleeve gets attached directly opposite to this seam. So what I'm going to do, changing camera angles here to make it easier to see, is line up the two seams so that the sleeve seam is on top of the bodice one, right sides together. The sleeve at the point of its seam is going to get attached about 2 inches down from the top edge of the bodice. So I'm just going to pin that in place with the pin holding the two pieces together at their matching seams. Then I gently stretched the other side of the sleeve until it lay flat and pinned it here onto the bodice on the bodice's top edge. Then I did the same for the other side, pulling it flat and pinning it onto the top edge the same distance so that it's pinned on symmetrically. The distance that I pinned them is sort of just eyeballed, but once it's pinned in place, you can see pretty much how it'll look when it's sewn on. And that looks good. Time to sew the sleeve in place. To sew it on, I used a straight stitch and carefully sewed along the top edge of the sleeve, sewing over the elastic and the casing underneath. I then tried it on to make sure that it fit, and that I didn't need to open up the casing and add or subtract any elastic, which is actually something I had to do for the first sleeve, but this one is perfect. Happy dance time! So the last thing to do, I just want to cut off that excess bit of fabric from the seam there, which I did just with a regular pair of fabric scissors. And then I went over this cut raw edge with my overlocking foot. And I am done. Now it's time to see the results. How did it turn out? Well, dang. That turned out really well. Here's the before and after of this upcycle. I just really like how this turned out, and I am obsessed with shirring now. I want to shirr all the things. Shirring is a really good way to make fitted clothing without needing exact measurements, which I'm all for, because accurate darts and super precise measuring still scares me a little bit. Also, if you wanted to know how to make these sleeves from scratch, I'm actually working on a from scratch dress right now out of this old bed sheet, and I want to create the same style of neckline and sleeves that I did for the blue top, but with making a pattern from scratch. So keep an eye out for that video, which will, fingers crossed, go live sometime next month. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up so that the YouTube algorithm actually shows this video to the subscribers of this channel. Stay crafty, and I'll see you all next time. Bye. Thank you so much to the 600 Patreon supporters, the superhuman producers, and the small brands who are all a huge reason that I can make these videos available to hundreds of thousands of you for free. If you've learned lots from my videos, or if it's just the kind of stuff you want to see more of in the world, then vote with your dollars and consider supporting me on patreon.com/Annika Victoria as a member, or for a one-off contribution, go to ko-fi.com/Annika Victoria. Your support means the world.